History in Hungary. Bye-bye nationalist PM Viktor Orban after 16 years in power. And hello, Mr. Peter Magyar. The opposition leader's supporters celebrated his landslide victory in Budapest. The election saw record voter turnout. But what does the result mean for Hungary, the rest of Europe, the US and Ukraine? Kim Lane Scheppele lived in Hungary and followed Orban's long tenure. She's a professor at Princeton University. Welcome back to DW, Kim. Did you expect such a resounding defeat?
Well, the polls actually said that we would have this kind of resounding victory, for Peter Magyar. But the problem with the Hungarian election system is that it's not a proportional representation system. So you can take the polls and you can run them through this system and you might have come out with a surprising result. The amazing thing here is that Peter Magyar actually hit all the spots in the Orban rigged system that allowed him to get the kind of victory that Orban used to get. After the last election, Orban said Orban had a victory that could be seen from the moon. This time, I think we have a victory that can be seen from Mars.
And where's this massive swing in opinion come from?
Well, a lot of the swing in opinion comes from Orban's own voters. In past elections, the opposition has tended to win in the cities, and Orban has won in the countryside. This time, when you look at the election maps and you see how it is that, that Orban's districts show up as orange on a map, and TISA, meaning Magyar's party, shows up as blue. It's just the whole country is blue. Just all these districts that are rural districts that have gone for Orban in election after election, switched over and voted for Peter Magyar, and not even by close margins. It's just a remarkable, remarkable victory.
But why, do you think?
Why? Well, what happened, Peter Magyar kind of came, first of all, out of Orban's camp. So he sits in the center right of the political spectrum, which is where the vast majority of Hungarian voters are. But the second thing, Orban controls all of the media. Orban controls all the megaphones that get messages out to general publics. So for the last 2 years, Peter Magyar has been going village to village to village, showing up in person and talking to voters. It's a small country, which is easier to do that in than in a really big country. But, what he did was to make personal contacts with the voters around Orban's media system. And ultimately, that's the thing that gave him his landslide victory today.
OK, well, more on Magyar in a moment. Let's have a listen to Orban's concession speech late Sunday night.
The election results aren't final yet, but they are clear. For us, they are painful, but clear. We have not been given the responsibility and opportunity to govern. I have congratulated the winner.
Kim, you wrote a Journal of Democracy essay, How Viktor Orban Wins. I guess you'll have to write a sequel to that. But in a nutshell, how did he manage to cling on so long?
Well, every time before, he came to power in 2010 in an election fair and square. The prior government had run the country into bankruptcy. He was basically the only candidate that was a responsible vote. But after that, he rigged each election thereafter. And he could rig the elections because, again, he tilted the system in favor of the countryside vote. And so that's why it was so crucial that Peter Magyar went out there into Orban's core territory and won over that vote, because otherwise he couldn't have possibly won, certainly not with this kind of election victory. So Peter Magyar was a close study of exactly how Orban won the prior elections, and he duplicated the kind of strategy that brought Orban to power before. So in some sense, there's this point in the Hungarian system where a simple majority, so Peter Magyar got 54% of the vote, he's going to get 69% of the seats in the parliament. That's that tipping effect. And he had to kind of hit that point so he got the benefit that Orban used to get. And that's why we're seeing this kind of huge victory.
But tell us what sort of system then Orban has left behind for this next guy.
Yeah, so Orban didn't just rig the election rules. He's rigged the entire system. So the first two obstacles that Peter Magyar is going to have to deal with are that there is a president, like the president in Germany, who signs off on all the laws. That president is still a Fidesz president, so he can be expected to be a veto on any new laws Peter Magyar tries to pass. Viktor Orban also packed the entire constitutional court, and any issue that doesn't get vetoed by the president may reasonably come before the constitutional court, which will then also block Peter Magyar. So he's going to have to find a way around those two obstacles. With a 2/3 majority, he can amend the constitution. He could even bring in a new constitution, and he can rewrite the laws on the constitutional court and the presidency to get the current obstacles out of the way. Now, that's going to be challenging because changing the laws is legal. Getting rid of current occupants is a little more challenging. But that's what Orban did to seize power, and Peter Magyar has a model he can follow.
Okay, well, here's the victory speech from the opposition leader.
Tisza and Hungary won this election. Not by a little, but by a lot. Indeed, a lot. Together, we replaced the Orban regime. Together, we liberated Hungary. Together, we took back our homeland.
So you reckon that this guy could use Orban's playbook to his benefit, to the benefit of Hungary as well? I mean, is this man a liberator?
Yes, well, that's how he's portrayed himself. So now we get to see. It was very significant in listening to Peter Magyar that he was referring to the Orban government, not by the word government, which is kormány in Hungarian, but he used the word rendszer, which is a kind of order. And a rendszerváltás, which was what that rendszerváltás means, like a system change. That was the word that the opposition used in 1989 and 90 to get rid of communism. And what Peter Magyar is doing is using that same language to say, we have to get rid of the Orban regime the way we got rid of communism. So that implies a huge change in the constitutional structure, which needs to be done to restore democracy. And, Peter Magyar was a little vague on exactly how he would do that, but that's clearly the language he's using. And so I think we can expect big constitutional changes to come.
Okay, so do we really know who this guy is? You say he's been vague on some policy positions, I guess to build broad support. What are the open questions then about what he actually does stand for?
Well, so most people had not heard of Peter Magyar until 2 years ago. He was kind of a cog in the machine of the Orban order, let's say. I was trying to use his language. And so he kind of popped out of that system. And he's been an anti-corruption campaigner. He said all the right things in order to document where the Orban government has crashed democracy, benefited itself, and impoverished the vast majority of Hungarians. So now he's going to have to come in and really do something quite significant. But who is he personally? Well, one of the things that brought him into government was weirdly a pedophilia scandal, okay? Not involving him, but involving a state school in Hungary where the principal of that school had permitted staff members to abuse the children under their care. There was this scandal when the Orban government pardoned the guy who ran that school. Okay, now, why am I saying this? Because the person who was held responsible for the pardon was the Justice Minister, Judit Varga. And Judit Varga is the ex-wife of Peter Magyar. And It was Orban blaming her and firing her that got Peter Magyar to break with the system and to say his opening line was, how dare Orban hide behind women's skirts? Because he knew the order for the pardon had really come from Orban. So there's a whole kind of drama going on behind the scenes here with all these personnel. But anyway, so Peter Magyar has run a very disciplined campaign. He's been on message. He's gone to the countryside, like I keep saying, because that's so surprising for the opposition. And so far, he's done really well. So we don't know a lot about him personally. He is someone who has not taken up a lot of progressive positions. He's probably going to follow through with a lot of the policies that Orban has enacted. He will be far more pro-EU. He will probably get Orban's, the Orban veto out of the way on Ukraine, but I doubt that he'll be an enthusiastic supporter of Ukraine because, frankly, Orban has whipped up Hungarian sentiment against Ukraine. So, I think he'll probably be a relief to the European Union. I think he probably will try to restore democratic institutions, but he's not by any means a kind of progressive or left candidate. In many ways, he will continue the domestic and European politics that Orban has championed.
But Kim, that all said, will he be working against the system? I mean, you said it, Orban still controls enormous media infrastructure, a loyal party machine, deep pockets, courts under control, the constitution rewritten. Sure, that's something that can be reversed, but how difficult will all of that be?
Yeah, so it'll be very difficult, and it'll matter a lot what he takes up first, because you can imagine that the Orban people in this so-called deep state are going to be fighting him tooth and nail. So I hope, he has the constitutional majority, as we call it. He can amend the constitution on day one. He can change a lot of the laws that Orban has put in place to hold his whole corrupt regime, in power. So I think, Peter Magyar is a lawyer. A lot of the people in his inner circle are lawyers. I think they've been studying the system. They know it very well. And so I think he will have a plan for fixing a lot of this. What he does say he'll do on day one is to join the European Public Prosecutor's Office, because a big chunk of what's wrong with Hungary is that Orban is portrayed as kind of being in the far right. Orban is actually a kleptocrat, first and foremost. This whole thing has about been enriching himself and his close allies. And the problem is the Public Prosecutor's Office in Hungary, which could be used to go after all that corruption, will not do it because it's packed with Orban supporters. So by joining the European Public Prosecutor's Office, Peter Magyar is going to signal that they really want to root out a lot of the corruption that has come from the misuse of EU funds. And that will be at least a very good first start.
And I guess there are a lot more EU funds on their way if he manages to do that. But when it comes to foreign affairs, will he have the US as a partner?
Yes. Well, so as you know, Mr. Trump, our president, went all in. He actually tweeted the night before the election that he would bail out Hungary financially if Orban were elected. J.D. Vance was there last week. Marco Rubio was there after the Munich Security Conference. It's very clear who Trump thinks is his ally. Okay, now, the good news is that Orban no longer controls the state. The bad news is that Orban has set up, with a lot of state money, a whole network of organizations that supports the far right in Europe, and that has schooled a lot of the people who now run the Trump administration. That whole network, it's run by a big group called the Matthias Corvinus Collegium, which is part boot camp, part college, part think tank, and part propaganda outfit. They control money that actually no longer depends on the state budget. So that organization is going to keep going, even if Orban is out of power. And that actually manages a whole network of think tanks, of boot camps, and of things that have actually supported the far right across Europe. That funding is actually secure, even if Orban loses the state. So don't expect the far right support coming from Hungarian precincts to evaporate anytime soon. Orban actually, sort of idiot-proof that, so to speak, against any future government coming in with a different set of ideas. So there's an expression in Hungary, I keep resorting because the Hungarian is so expressive here. There's an expression in Hungarian where you call someone like this an aranypolk, which means a golden spider who sits at the center of a web and just traps everything in his orbit. And Orban still has that kind of control over the European far right.
Surely, though, with J.D. Vance there coming all the way from the States to meddle, some would say, in the election, and obviously put his money on the wrong horse, I mean, that's got to be embarrassing. And surely that would complicate the relationship with the US going forward, wouldn't it?
Yeah, you'd think so. But, and in fact, it looked like the polls for Orban dropped by 3 points after Vance was there. So it looked like it didn't actually help him. But, so, I mean, J.D. Vance is not known for charisma. And he certainly didn't show a lot of charisma during his visit. But yes, it's embarrassing. But this is why Trump did not come himself. You know, if Orban was going to win, Trump would want some piece of that, right? But this was a way of saying that the U.S. has your back. We'll send you our least charismatic spokesperson to wrap up your campaign. And there we have it. J.D. Vance losing an election.
Now, you touched on Ukraine earlier. Can the Ukrainians expect a different tack, some sort of aid? Can the Russians expect sanctions sometime soon?
Yeah, so one of the things we've now learned, because there have been so many tapes released in the last several weeks of Orban talking to Putin, of the foreign minister Szijjártó talking to Mr. Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, we now know that Hungary has been Russia's obedient servant, gumming up the works inside the EU. And one can expect, although we don't have all the smoking gun evidence yet, that Hungary was handily rewarded for that in all kinds of ways, right? So Peter Magyar has said that he will drop these connections with the Russians, that he will no longer use the Russian veto, essentially, that Orban was exercising inside the EU. So that will change a lot. But in exchange, because I think the Russian government has been holding up part of Orban's regime, at least fiscally, at least as much as it could, Peter Magyar needs to get the EU money back to be able to break free of the Russian influence. And I think that's what he's telling the EU. You need to give us the money. We will go through with our anti-corruption measures, but we need your help now to get rid of this Russian support. So that's Russia. Now,
but
on Ukraine, I don't...
Russian oil and gas, while we're on topic?
Yeah, exactly. So Hungary is no longer getting Russian oil because I think it was the Russians that blew up the Druzhba pipeline that brings the oil from Russia to Hungary. So Hungary is now rather short on Russian oil. And there was this false flag attempt to blow up the pipeline that brought Russian gas from Russia through Serbia to Hungary. So Hungary has all these carve-outs from the EU to still get its energy supply from Russia. I think that Peter Magyar will be much more open to some of the alternatives that the EU has floated, using a pipeline through Croatia, for example. And, you know, there are other things that the EU has said to try to wean Hungary off Russian oil and gas. But it's going to be a while before that can happen because the infrastructure isn't quite there yet. I do think, however, that Peter Magyar will try to give up a lot of Russian influence in Hungary, which comes in part through the provision of Russian energy. Orban used as a campaign slogan that Hungary has the cheapest prices for oil and gas in the EU, and actually that's not even true. The deals that Orban struck with Putin right before the election in 2022 are actually not bargain basement rates anymore. So there are all kinds of reasons why Hungary could switch over to other kinds of energy resources, and I think that's what they need to do. Hungary has been doing that a bit, and this is the other influence we haven't really talked about. The Orban government was very close to China and had adopted, for example, Huawei 5G technology, had adopted Chinese facial recognition technology, and was building Chinese battery factories like crazy, including battery factories that have now polluted a lot of, groundwater and other things in Hungary. So this is another kind of influence that Hungary is going to have to, that the Magyar government's going to have to cope with. And he's taken a stand against the battery factories. But then the question is, where does the energy come from? Can Hungary tolerate the switch to electric vehicles, which is, this is the German connection, because Hungary has been the producer of German cars that are not yet EVs, so all of that's going to have to evolve as, Peter Magyar copes with handling the constitutional crisis. He's also going to have to remake the economy, actually. Big job ahead. It's like 1989 all over again.
Kim, what about the Ukrainians? You're going to say something else on that.
Oh, right. And the Ukrainians. Yeah. So here's the problem. There is a big ethnic Hungarian minority in Ukraine. And that minority feels aggrieved because Ukraine, not under Zelensky, but before Zelensky, abolished the bilingual schools that had operated in that area and passed language laws that put the Hungarian language at a disadvantage. Orban whipped up all kinds of anti-Ukrainian anger, right, in Hungary over this sense that the Hungarian minority was being maltreated. And Peter Magyar really can't go against that, actually, until the rights of the Ukrainian minority in Transcarpathia are restored. Zelensky has actually done something to go down that road. But again, it's right now a very tough relationship between Ukraine and Hungary. And, you know, Peter Magyar is going to have to probably not agree to EU further steps toward accession unless Hungary is not part of the financial part of that mix. But Hungary already has a carve out. This is going to be a long, slow process to get Ukraine to follow all the rules it has to follow before EU accession is imminent. So I think Magyar will not veto anything. I think he will not be the most enthusiastic supporter. And if Hungarian money is on the line, he might insist still on an exemption.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned the election won't change the financial position of the right in Hungary. But what's Orban's defeat mean for far-right movements elsewhere?
Yeah, so the far right has been supported through this network that Orban controls that I mentioned earlier, this Matthias Corvinus Collegium, and all of its little branch offices, shall we say, all over the place. My guess is that that support will continue because Orban, if he isn't going to be able to wield power in Hungary, is going to turn to wielding power in the EU. And he's not going to be able to do it through sitting in the European Council, but he will be able to do it through leading the third largest party in the European Parliament. And so I suspect that the Patriots for Europe party, which Orban cobbled together out of all the parties that he supported with his MCC money, that party will now become where Orban tries to influence the EU and also make his way back into domestic politics. You may recall this is how Nigel Farage's party waited out the storm and Marine Le Pen's party. They got a lot of their energy and a lot of their ability to hold their party together by working from the EU Parliament back out to their national governments.
And it doesn't sound like it's game over at all for Orban,
No,
despite a landslide defeat.
Right. Remember, Orban's only 62. I mean, he looks older and he's not healthy, but he's
only 62. And he considers
62.
himself a young man.
And right. In fact, the Fidesz party, the name of it, the FI in Fidesz stands for the word for youth in Hungarian. And they tried to change their names after they outgrew their party name, but then they couldn't, so they still think of themselves as the young guys who run Hungary. And there's a lot more political life left in Orban. He's a fighter, and we have not heard the end of him.
Very interesting analysis from Kim Lane Scheppele, Princeton University. Thanks so much for your time and great chatting to you tonight.
Great chatting to you. Glad DW is on the case.
We sure are. Thank you, Kim. I'm Ben Fajzullin. Thank you very much for your time. We leave you with some pictures of the historic night in Hungary.